The night had the kind of stillness that makes you listen more closely, as if the air itself holds its breath. From the balcony of their loft in downtown Seattle, Ethan Cole leaned against the cool iron railing, watching the pale lights of the city ripple against the water. Ferries moved like patient silver ghosts across the bay, and the wind carried the distant hum of the streets below. Inside, Lena laughed. That sound used to feel like a lighthouse, warm, guiding, a place to return to. Now it drifted out of the living room like perfume you can still smell after someone's already left. Ethan closed his eyes and let the sound wash over him, soft and bright, but no longer meant for him. It belonged to her friends, to that other world she now lived in. They had met 10 years earlier on a spring afternoon that smelled of cherry blossoms and rain. He'd been late to a lecture at the university, back when he was still an aerospace engineer in training, just another man carrying a backpack heavier than his confidence. She'd been standing on the library steps in a yellow dress, the kind that seemed to borrow its brightness from the sun. She smiled at him, as if she already knew him. And, in a way, she did. From the beginning, Lena loved how steady he was, how sure his hands felt even when his words faltered. And Ethan, quiet, deliberate Ethan, was captivated by the way she seemed to pull the world into orbit around her. She was light, laughter, momentum. He was the anchor she said she needed. But time, that sly and patient thief, has a way of rearranging people. Now, Lena was no longer the girl in the yellow dress. She was a PR executive. Her days in endless choreography of strategy meetings, networking events, and champagne-glazed fundraisers. Her smile was still radiant, but it was practiced now, honed to perfection, like the sharp edge of a glass. Ethan had built airplanes. Lena had built an image. He turned from the balcony and watched her through the sliding doors. She stood at the center of the room like a flame, hair swept perfectly to one side, laughter curling through the air as effortlessly as smoke. Around her, her friends were gathered in a half-moon, hanging on to every light remark, every carefully placed gesture. She belonged to them as much as she once belonged to him. Ethan remembered another night, years ago, when she had walked into their tiny, cluttered kitchen barefoot, hair messy from the rain, holding 2 cheap bottles of wine. They had sat on the floor, their backs against the oven, and she'd whispered, "I love how quiet you are, like the world gets softer around you." He'd believed her. He still wanted to, but now, when Lena talked about him to her friends, her tone carried something else, a polished humor, designed to land gently and still cut. He wasn't the anchor anymore. He was the background character, the dull man with a steady job and nothing clever to say at their glittering parties. Ethan ran a thumb along the rim of his coffee mug, feeling the warmth fade. That fading warmth mirrored something inside him, a quiet ache that didn't scream, didn't rage. It simply waited, patient, like cracks beneath the surface of glass. They don't show at first. They wait for the right kind of pressure. His phone buzzed softly. A message from Lena. "Don't disappear tonight. It's Sabrina's soiree. Everyone's coming. Wear something sharp." It wasn't a question. It never was. He sighed. Not the sound of exhaustion, but the kind of sigh you make when you're trying not to disturb something fragile. Ethan looked once more at the city. He loved it. The smell of the docks after rain, the way the clouds hung low over the water, the quiet alleys where conversations didn't need to be loud to be real. But that world didn't belong to Lena anymore. Her world was champagne flutes, curated playlists, and flashes from someone else's camera. In the reflection of the glass door, he caught his own face. Older now. Not tired exactly, but weathered, like an old wing spar of an aircraft that has carried too much weight for too many years. A part of him still loved her so fiercely it hurt to breathe. And another part was beginning to wonder what it might mean to stop holding on. Behind him, Lena's laughter rose again. Higher, brighter, like the strike of a match. And Ethan, silent as ever, knew something was coming. He couldn't name it yet, but he could feel it, like the low hum of an engine before takeoff. We used to be the loudest thing in a room, he thought. Now the room swallows me whole. The evening pressed in closer, and the city lights blinked like distant stars. Somewhere between the balcony and the living room, between who they were and who they had become, a story was already beginning to crack open. And if you're still here, listening to the first shiver of that fracture, stay with me. Sometimes the quietest beginnings lead to the loudest reckonings. If this story has already pulled you a little closer, if it made you feel the sting beneath the softness, tap the like button, leave a thought below, or follow along. The night has only just started to speak. The elevator rose without urgency, humming like a lullaby that had forgotten its words. Ethan watched the floor numbers glow and fade, as Lena adjusted the cuff of his jacket with the practiced touch of a stylist. Her perfume, the same bright, expensive scent she wore to product launches, hung in the small mirrored box like a decision already made. "You look handsome," she said, and the compliment landed like a paper boat on dark water. Visible, delicate, unmoored. He smiled anyway. "You'll outshine everyone." "That's the job," she answered lightly, and he could not tell if she meant the party or the marriage. The doors parted onto Sabrina's rooftop as if a curtain had been drawn. Seattle lay wide and radiant beneath it. Harbor lights like constellations spilled over the water, the skyline a clean geometry against a thinning mist. String lights traced soft halos along the perimeter, and heaters breathed discreet warmth into the spring night. Waitstaff moved like well-kept secrets, all black and silver hands. Somewhere, a cello found a low note and held it, the sound of evening discovering its own throat. Sabrina, sleek dress, quick eyes, crossed the terrace with the choreography of a woman who collects moments for a living. She kissed Lena's cheeks, embraced Ethan with professional affection, and turned them effortlessly toward the nearest constellation of guests. Introductions assembled themselves: venture capitalists, brand strategists, a playwright with a grin like a folded knife, a photographer whose lenses cost as much as a small car. The conversation had its own gravity, pulling everyone into a tight, glittering orbit. Ethan let himself be introduced the way you let a coat be taken from your shoulders. Polite surrender. He knew how to perform. He had spent years translating complex systems into sentences a room could love. But tonight the words sat stubbornly on the tongue. Lena brushed his arm, a gesture that felt almost private, and he followed her into the swell of laughter and glass. There were fewer jokes about him now. Sabrina's circle knew which edges to keep hidden, but another sort of distance announced itself, gentler and more absolute. The distance of fluency. People here spoke a dialect made of metrics and mood boards, of campaigns shaping the moment and partnerships elevating a narrative. They were fluent in a weather that changed by spark and rumor. Ethan understood the nouns, not the hunger. Ethan, Marcus, Sabrina's husband, appeared at the edge of the group, hands tucked into his pockets like apologies. "You see the new ferries?" Hydrogens, gorgeous beasts. Ethan's shoulders eased. "Read the specs last week. The torque curves are—" He stopped himself, smiled. "They're beautiful." Marcus's relief was almost touching. "Come see the view." He nodded toward the railing. "Quieter over there." They stepped away. The sound of the party thinned to a tasteful shimmer. Below, the bay breathed. Ethan rested his palms on the cool rail. "Thanks," he said.
For what?
"For knowing when a man needs to look at real water." They shared the sort of half-laugh that never quite leaves the chest. Behind them, Lena's voice rose in a bright spiral. He turned. She was telling a story, something small, how she'd wrangled a client out of a crisis, and the group leaned toward her the way flowers lean toward heat. Pride should have been the easiest emotion. It had always been. He felt it. But it traveled a longer road now, through rooms where admiration took the same shape as absence. "Your wife is extraordinary," Marcus said. Not as praise, but as a fact that could be set on a table and examined. "I know," Ethan answered, and the words tasted true and old. Sabrina approached with fresh flutes of something crisp. "You're hoarding the only men who don't talk in hashtags," she teased Marcus, then to Ethan softer. "Thank you for coming. Lena sleeps better when you're visible." There was no malice in it. It was a kindness that didn't know its own blade. Ethan nodded. "Happy to be here," Sabrina supplied, completing the sentence as if it had merely forgotten itself. She turned back toward the glow. "We're doing a little toast in 10. Stay close." When she left, the air seemed to reassemble into a party. Ethan and Marcus returned to the circle. A woman in emerald silk asked Ethan whether aerospace felt romantic or merely mechanical, and he found the gentlest truth. Flight is math written as longing. She applauded the line with her eyes, then pivoted gracefully towards someone famous from the internet. Lena threaded her fingers through Ethan's for a moment, just long enough to be seen, and released him. He caught her glance. It said, "Are you all right?" and also, "We are hosting," and also, "Do not vanish." He nodded, letting her see only the top layer of his answer. The toast gathered itself like a tide. Sabrina lifted her glass and spoke about the city's audacity, about building things that looked like miracles until you learned the invoices. Laughter broke where it should. Cameras rose. For an instant, as flashes seeded little suns into the air, Ethan saw the party as a constellation from above. Bright points, precise lines. No room for dark. When the clinking dissolved, the playlist found a memory. One of those early 2000s refrains that live inside the body, even when the mind pretends it has better taste. A cheer rippled through the guests. The terrace loosened. High heels clicked an agreeable rhythm. People moved. Lena's face opened in astonishment. A real smile, older than strategy. She took Sabrina's hands, then spun out, hair catching light. For a few grounded seconds, Ethan felt the old gravity. The kitchen floor, 2 cheap bottles of wine. A girl in a rain-slick laugh saying, "You quiet the world." The recollection did not accuse him. It beckoned. He found Marcus again, who had retreated to the bar like a lighthouse. "You dance?" Marcus asked. "Badly," Ethan admitted. "Best kind." Marcus tipped his chin toward the floor, where the beautiful and the brave were trying not to sweat. Ethan hesitated at the edge, that slender borderland between watching and being seen. The song changed key. The crowd surrendered. Lena pivoted through the circle with the unstudied appeal of someone in her element. She did not look at him, and that detail stung, precisely because it was unintentional. He wanted to cross the distance and be small with her, inside the music, to put one hand at the straight line of her back and use a language he hadn't forgotten. Instead, he waited. 1 beat, 2, and then moved forward. "Mrs. Cole," he said softly when she spun close, the formality a private joke from early days. She turned, surprised into tenderness. For a moment her gaze was entirely his. He offered a hand, not a demand. A question, not a rescue. Her fingers rested in his. Their palms met. Warmth over old memory, and the party's glare gentled at the edges, like a lens deciding to focus on what mattered. Tension loosened at the back of his heart. He did not pull her close yet. He allowed for the ghost of space between them, the margin where new things can begin. He felt the smallest yielding in her wrist, the body's way of saying yes before the mouth remembers what it promised. Around them, the city exhaled. Music, chatter, glass. He stepped in, not a claim, only a measure, and the circle widened to make room. Someone laughed nearby. Someone else pretended not to watch. The world narrowed to her shoulder beneath his palm, the steady rise and fall, the faintest perfume of pear and smoke. For 3 breaths the evening was simple, their sway, their history, the unplayed future trembling like a note a cellist is about to release. Then a flicker passed through Lena's expression, some calculation, some audience she remembered she was holding. She glanced beyond him, toward the ring of faces and phones, and Ethan felt the air tilt. The distance returned, stealthy as cold. He kept his posture soft, his voice low, his smile the one he used when flight tests hiccuped and the sky had to be coaxed rather than challenged. "Only a minute," he murmured, as if asking permission to be exactly who they were before the room learned their names. The sun climbed, the night leaned in, and the rooftop became the very edge of a choice. For a moment it was easy, easier than either of them deserved. Ethan's hand found the small, composed line of Lena's back, and their bodies remembered what their voices had misplaced. The rooftop softened around them. Music folded itself into something almost private, and the night, with all its chandeliers of stars and electricity, seemed to lower its voice. "Just a minute," he whispered, not a plea so much as a truce. Her gaze lifted to his, and there it was. The girl on the library steps in the yellow dress, rain caught in her hair. A future so bright they both had to squint to bear it. But a camera blinked. The circle pressed in by the width of a breath. Sabrina's laughter rose like the pop of a cork, and the spell thinned. Lena's eyes flickered beyond his shoulder, counting faces, reading the room the way navigators read currents. He felt the shift before he saw it, the way a pilot feels a crosswind tug an aircraft off-center. "Don't make this a thing," she said softly, and for one forgiving heartbeat he thought she meant the quarrels, the edge, the months of breath measured in careful teaspoons. "I won't," he promised. Her smile moved. 2 degrees colder, 2 carats brighter. She stepped back the smallest distance, enough to register in every watching throat, and the music seemed to find a sharper key. Ethan, who had landed planes in worse weather than words, drew a breath to steady the approach. He leaned in, not for spectacle, not for victory. Just a kiss, light as punctuation. The period you place at the end of a sentence to say, "We are still us." Lena's hand lifted, not to meet him, but to hold him off, palm hovering between their mouths like glass. Something imperceptible in the circle tightened. Then she found her stage voice, the one that warmed rooms without using heat. "Oh, Ethan," she said, bright enough to glitter, loud enough to travel. "I'd rather kiss my cat." Laughter arrived on cue. It rose in tears, the surprised burst, the relieved chorus, the ornamental trills of people who could not bear a silence too close to truth. The string lights seemed, absurdly, to flicker in applause. A waiter paused mid-step. Somewhere at the edge, the cellist's bow faltered and then went on. The words hung between them, impossible to take back, weightless and heavy in equal measure. Ethan did not move. His mouth was still turned toward hers, close enough to feel the cool of air her refusal had invited in. It was astonishing how far a single sentence could travel. It rushed through him, through the years, through their kitchen floor and the cheap wine, and the girl who had once said he quieted the world. Someone near the bar choked on a laugh and converted it into a cough. Sabrina lifted her glass as if to toast away the sting. Marcus looked at his shoes the way decent men sometimes do when a room has chosen the wrong theater. And Jules, emerald silk, thoughtful eyes, did not laugh at all. She watched Lena, then Ethan, and the pity in her gaze felt like a hand placed discreetly on a wound you didn't know you were showing. Ethan swallowed. He could feel his pulse in his palms, in the small tendons of his throat, in the wordless engine of his chest. A humiliation wants spectacle to survive. It feeds on velocity. He did nothing to feed it. He let the laughter crest and recede like a wave hitting a seawall, the water shattering into harmless lace. "Lena," he said, so quietly that only those closest would hear, and perhaps that was the only audience he wanted. "Please." It was not a request to reverse time. It was a request to remember. But memory is a fragile instrument. It goes out of tune when played for crowds. She held his gaze with a composure that had conquered boardrooms, then turned slightly toward her half-moon of witnesses, shoulders arranged in a pose that said both lightness and control. "Oh, don't be dramatic," she added, a gentler knife aimed to cauterize. "We're having fun." The crowd gratefully adopted the cue. "Fun!" they echoed, as though the word itself could soften a blow already landed. A camera lifted and fell, capturing a frame that would later be captioned with something airy and forgettable. The party resumed its thrum. Music, glass, a city unconcerned with a heart cracking like ice under a confident heel. Within that thrum, Ethan's silence deepened. He had learned to respect the second between strain and failure, the breath in which structure announces what it can no longer carry. Standing there, he could almost hear it, the internal groan of some beam he'd trusted, the sigh of a rivet turning traitor. His mind, ever faithful to metaphor, offered him a picture of a hairline fracture running the length of a wing, invisible until the day the light hit it just so. Lena laughed again, softer now, perhaps already embarrassed by her own flourish. She touched his sleeve, a gesture that might have been a peace offering if not for the tremor of performance still clinging to it. "Ethan," she said under the noise, "don't make it weird." He considered the request. He considered the entire sky of themselves and how often he had chosen the lesser weather to spare them turbulence. He almost nodded. He almost folded the moment into that drawer where husbands put the things they cannot fix, under socks, beneath winter scarves, labeled later. But later had finally walked into the room and asked to be introduced. He felt Marcus approach, the friendly gravity of a man who wanted to pull a friend out of a rip current without making a scene. "Top up?" Marcus offered, lifting a bottle he had no intention of pouring from. "Not yet," Ethan said, and the words steadied his balance like widening a stance. Jewel stepped nearer too, just enough to occupy the space where a cruelty might echo. She tilted her head, the question in her eyes warmer than any defense. "Are you all right?" He answered her with the small, honest nod. He would be. He did not feel it yet, but the truth had a way of arriving late and staying long. "Dance with me," Lena said brightly, making theater of inclusion. "Come on, darling." The darling slipped on the tile between them. It slid and never came back. He looked at her hand. He thought of the soft astonishment on her face a minute earlier, when the music had first widened and remembered them. He thought of how quickly a room can convince you to betray yourself. Then he raised his eyes and found hers, and, to his quiet relief, there was a flicker. Remorse, maybe, or only annoyance at a line gone wrong. He did not punish her with the distinction. "Another minute," he said, and the gentleness in his voice surprised him. He was not a man made for reprisals. He was made for blueprints and lift, for patience married to force. He was made for repair, until he wasn't. The laughter elsewhere thinned, uncertain of its cue. Wind lifted the edge of the linen on a nearby table, revealing the metal beneath. A ferry horn sounded from the bay, long and low, as if the city were clearing its throat before delivering a verdict. If the night had been a conversation, this was the point at which both speakers understood that the next sentence would decide the rest. Ethan set his empty glass aside. He straightened, not rigid, not theatrical, only true. The first humiliation had landed, the room had applauded, The story had taken its bait. He chose, with the precise mercy of a man who knows where to place pressure and where to release it, not to leave and not to bow. He lifted his head, found the surest version of his own voice, and prepared to answer. The night waited for him. Not the guests, not the cameras, not the friendly music that had learned to be background, but the night itself, a dark, generous listener. Ethan felt it settle around his shoulders like a coat he hadn't worn in years, familiar in the seams. He set his glass on the rail and let his breath even out, a craftsman measuring twice before the cut. He looked at Lena as a man looks at a blueprint he once knew by heart, remembering the lines, admitting the cracks, and when he spoke, his voice carried only as far as it needed to, which is to say, far enough. At least the cat still runs to the door when he hears me. It was almost nothing, a small sentence polished by restraint. But restraint is a kind of blade. The words crossed the narrow space between them and landed without raising their voice, the way a verdict can be spoken in a whisper and still rearrange a room. Sound altered first at the edges. Laughter broke off like glass catching a sleeve. The cello found silence. A trio by the heaters froze mid-smile, uncertain whether to applaud or adjust their scarves. Sabrina's mouth opened in surprise, then closed with the clean efficiency of a door deciding to be a wall. Marcus made a helpless sound that wanted to be a cough and became a low, respectful, well. Ethan didn't watch them. He watched Lena. Watched the first flash of disbelief, the quick calculation that followed, the flicker of heat over the wreckage of decorum. For one fragile heartbeat, he worried that he had gone too far. But the worry passed. He recognized the feeling not as guilt, but as the old habit of making himself small so that a room might feel large. And, he added, so gently it felt like setting a teacup back into its saucer, Milo never pretends to be asleep when I speak. A ripple moved through the crowd. Not quite laughter and not yet judgment. It sounded like wind combing through tall grass, the noise a field makes when something honest has crossed it. Jules pressed her lips together, the beginnings of a smile she didn't permit to become a weapon. Someone at the bar whispered, "Oh." Not cruel, not delighted, only, oh. Lena held very still. The shine on her cheekbones seemed suddenly ornamental, the evening's choreography a costume that had forgotten its purpose. "That's unkind," she said, voice low, private again, as if the room might give them back their earlier minute if asked nicely. "So was yours," he answered, and the calm in him surprised him all over again. He was not trembling. His heart did not batter his chest for escape. He felt like a pilot who has decided, at last, to fly through the storm and not around it. The circle reformed at a safer distance, the way people step back from an argument between weather systems. Ethan could feel years rerouting themselves under his feet, small compromises marching backward toward their point of origin, apologies unspooling their belts, the word darling relinquishing its stage. He didn't want to humiliate her. The knowledge of that steadied him. He wanted only to tell the truth where everyone could hear it, because she had chosen the same theater for a lie. He wanted only to step out from the neutral shade he'd been asked to live in and stand for a moment where the light could find what he still was. "Shall we dance?" he said, because kindness matters even on a battlefield. His hand hovered, not begging, not commanding. Something in her softened and then hardened, the tide coming in, the tide going out. "We're in the middle of something," she said, and he understood that she didn't mean the song. "We are," he agreed. "We've been in the middle of it for a long time." It might have ended there, two people dividing a sentence between them, if not for the way rooms hunger for closure. From the far side of the terrace, a small, unauthorized cheer rose and dissolved, as if someone had toasted to gravity. A couple of the men, the ones who attend these nights the way honest tools attend a drawer, tilted their bottles in his direction with an almost invisible salute. Their wives noticed and adjusted their expressions accordingly. Sabrina approached. Diplomatic smile lit like emergency exit signage. "Friends," she said to the air, not quite looking at either of them. "Shall we take a turn toward dessert?" The staff, grateful for an instruction they understood, began arranging silver clematis of forks. Ethan stepped back a half pace, granting the event its dignity. He thought of the house he and Lena had built out of favors and patience, the way they'd painted the walls in colors chosen for how well they hosted other people's eyes. He thought of the girl who once sat on his kitchen floor and called his quiet a harbor. Had she changed so much? Or had he merely stopped speaking in a language she could hear over applause? Jules slipped close enough that her perfume, something green like a wet leaf torn cleanly, touched his breath. "That was brave," she murmured, which he understood as a way of naming tenderness without making it a scene. "I don't think it was bravery," he said. "I think it was simply not pretending." "Those are sometimes the same thing," she replied, and left him to the dark that had become a friend again. A server offered him a plate. He took nothing. Hunger felt irrelevant. A cousin who had chosen the wrong wedding. Across the terrace, Lena accepted compliments with a face that knew where to store them. Twice her gaze slid toward him and away. The second time she didn't disguise the flicker of anger underneath. He couldn't blame her for it. Anger is a door you can close. Shame is a window. Marcus drifted to his side, proffering nothing but company. "You all right?" "I will be," Ethan said, and it sounded like a promise made to the right person. "Good," Marcus answered, "because I think half the terrace just discovered that honesty throws better parties than charm." Ethan smiled despite himself. "Not sure charm will forgive you." "Charm never does," Marcus said, and the two men watched the lights in the bay rearrange themselves like thoughts. Music returned, diligent and slightly abashed, like a host who has mispronounced a guest's name and resolved to do better. People resumed the ordinary business of glittering, bites, sips, the long art of standing beautifully. Somewhere behind the planters, the cellist began to play a waltz that didn't ask for permission. Ethan considered crossing the floor to Lena, to offer her the grace of an exit line that made this look like choreography. But grace, he realized, wasn't a line anymore. It was leaving her the dignity of anger, declining to turn one wound into two, refusing the room the sequel it craved. He picked up his jacket from the back of a chair. The night air reached him, cool as a hand on a fevered brow. He found Lena once more across the distance. She met his gaze with something that might have been a dare or an apology, if either of them could afford to spend it. He inclined his head, a bow to the years. She did not return it, and that, too, was a kind of answer. As he moved toward the elevator, the terrace rearranged itself to pretend he had not crossed it. Jules looked down at her glass to keep from looking up at him. Marcus pretended to examine the skyline, then failed and gave Ethan the smallest nod. Sabrina's smile brightened 2 lumens, the way good hosts brighten light when a fuse is blown elsewhere. The elevator doors parted with the hush of a curtain obliged to rise. He stepped in and, for the first time that evening, saw himself in the mirrored walls without flinching. Not triumphant, not aggrieved. Simply a man who had said a true thing at the time it needed saying. The doors closed. Above, a ferry drew a long line of sound across the water, something between a hymn and a warning, and the party resumed its work of being beautiful. Down in the mirrored box, Ethan rested his back against cool steel and let the engine's gentle descent enroll the last of his shaking. When the elevator sighed open into the lobby's quiet, the city met him with its ordinary, impossible mercy. He walked out to meet it, steady now, carrying nothing he hadn't chosen to keep. The elevator returned him to earth as gently as it knew how, but the ground felt altered, like a street resurfaced in the night. Outside, the bay was a slow, dark animal turning in its sleep. A valet brought the car. Lena arrived an instant later, her heels sketching impatience across the pavement. Neither of them spoke. They slid into their separate silences and let the city begin its work of ferrying them home. Traffic had thinned to a silver thread. The wipers ticked once, as if remembering rain. Ethan watched the road the way a man watches a low horizon from the cockpit, aware of every small tilt and hum. Beside him, Lena stared straight ahead, chin high, her mouth composed into something a mirror would forgive. The scent of her hair filled the cabin. It had always meant harbor. Tonight, it meant rehearsal. Halfway to the loft, the streetlights blurred into narrow comets, and the quiet, having done its duty, surrendered. "You humiliated me," she said, carefully, each word a crystal she inspected for chips before setting it down. In front of everyone, Ethan kept his hands at 10 and 2, not out of fear, but for the comfort of Rails. "You humiliated me first," he said, the sentence without adornment. "It was a joke." She turned toward him for the first time, eyes bright, cheeks flushed with the heat embarrassment uses for fuel. "You know how these things are. You could have laughed." "I have," he said. "For years." The tires murmured over a seam in the asphalt. Their bodies rose and settled by the same inch. She exhaled, a blade sheathed with velvet. "You made me look cruel," he considered the gentlest answer that could still carry truth. "I didn't make you anything." "That line about Milo." Her voice thinned. "People will talk." "They were already talking," he said. "You gave them a headline. I supplied a subhead." Her laugh was soft and wrong. "You think that's clever?" "No." He shook his head. "I think it's accurate." Anger flamed and guttered. Something quieter stood behind it, something with older bones. "Do you?" she asked, and the question trembled in its expensive shoes. "Do you think I don't love you?" He let the question touch him before he answered, the way you let a bird settle on your wrist so it won't break its own heart. "I think," he said, "you loved me better when no one was watching." The words surprised them both by how gently they landed. She turned back to the windshield. For a few blocks, neither spoke. The city poured itself around them, generous and oblivious. When they reached their building, he pulled into the garage, killed the engine, and for a few suspended seconds, they remained inside the cocoon of quiet machinery cooling down. "I can't be the only person managing optics," she whispered, not quite to him. "I carry both of us all night, and then you—" She stopped, searching. "You break the plate in the middle of the table." He pictured it, the white plate, the bright crack, the scattered fruit. "Sometimes you don't break the plate," he said. Sometimes it was flawed in the kiln. She shut her eyes. When she opened them again, her professionalism had returned like a coat held out by an unseen hand. "We'll talk upstairs," she said, "not here." They rode the elevator with their reflections. In the loft, the dark welcomed them first. Then the cat, Milo, arrived on soundless paws and pressed his side against Ethan's shin as if the body keeps better calendars than the mind. Ethan crouched and let the warm weight bump his palm. A small ritual returned intact. "Please don't reward him," Lena said from the doorway, and even she heard the pettiness and flinched. "I didn't mean—" She closed her eyes again, steadied herself, turned on the lamps. Light fell through the room's bones like water through glass. They sat at opposite ends of the couch, the distance between them exact and undecorated. "I shouldn't have said the cat thing," she began. The admission came out angled, the way a woman in heels learns to turn on stairs. It was thoughtless. "Thank you," he said. Gratitude, he discovered, could be both true and insufficient. She searched for the usable emotion. "Cornered. Sabrina's people. The new client. I live on a tightrope, Ethan. Sometimes I perform before I feel. You know this. It's my work." "And my life," he said softly. She winced. It was the right verb. "I've asked a lot of you," she said. "To appear. To smile. To be the stable thing in a room that isn't. I know that costs something. she faltered, palm up, as if asking the night for a word. I just needed tonight not to cost me too. It cost us, he said. They sat with that. Milo leapt onto the arm of the couch between them and considered the ancient mathematics of lapse. He chose Ethan's and folded himself into a loaf, as if proofs could purr. Ethan's phone buzzed on the coffee table. He ignored it, then thought better and picked it up. A message from Marcus slid across the screen. Marcus. You okay? Marcus. I've got, not advice, but maybe context. Marcus. Screenshots if you want them. Sabrina forgot her phone open. A second buzz. An image. Then another arrived. Ethan hesitated, looked at Lena. She had turned away, elbows on knees, eyes on the rug as if reading the pattern for a route back to herself. Do you mind if I, he asked, and held the phone an inch higher. Do what you want, she said, not unkindly, only tired. He opened the first image. A group chat named Greenlight. Sabrina, Jules, 3 other names he recognized, a few he didn't. The thread began with a velvet dagger. Sabrina. Are we okay? That escalated. Tamsin. Lena, the cat line was savage. Funny, but savage. Jules. I didn't think it was funny. He looked small. Ari. He gave it back, though. Points for spine. Sabrina. We're not scoring a marriage, Ari. Another image. Timestamps, stacked hearts, tiny storms of punctuation. The voices braided and unbraided, a chorus deciding what it had seen. Jules. Can we hold space for the fact that loving someone in public is a skill? We're all trained for it. He isn't. Tamsin. He's an adult. Buy a suit for your feelings. Sabrina. He's never been the room. He's always been the landing. Ari. Landing greater than room. For what it's worth, Ethan felt the odd mercy of being witnessed by strangers who were not entirely strangers. Not absolution. Not indictment. A record. A final screenshot. Lena, I adore you. I also think you were unkind. Call me if you want me to say that where it helps. The phone weighed more in his hand. He placed it face down on the table. They're talking, he said. They always talk, Lena replied, brittle with resignation. It's oxygen. Jules defended me, he said. And you. That's worse, she murmured, and when he looked up, he saw tears brimming unshed, held back not by pride, but by a dam built of habit. It means I was visible. He almost reached for her. His body knew the route by heart, how to cross a room and make his palm a roof. But there are nights when kindness becomes collusion. He chose, for once, not to rescue her from a feeling she had hired. What do you want to happen now? He asked. Her eyes cleared with the clarity of work. I'll fix it. How? A dinner, she said, already assembling the pieces at speed. Here, Friday, small, curated. We apologize to the circle together. We show, she caught herself and changed the verb. We are a unit. The narrative becomes reconciliation. And the marriage? He asked. She swallowed. We negotiate that in private. He nodded. The proposal was clean. Its cost was hidden in the fine print, as ever. If we do this, he said, the apology isn't symmetrical. Color rose in her cheeks. You expect me to kneel? I expect you to speak the truer sentence first. He kept his voice gentle. You started it. I finished it. Those are not the same verb. She stared at him a long time, the way you stare at a sea and try to remember how to swim. I can say I was unkind, she said at last, the words heavy as wet wool. I can't say I was wrong to manage everything I have to manage. I wish you would help with that instead of cutting the ropes. He considered the fairness buried in the plea. He had been content to be ballast. She had been required to be wind. Both roles can exhaust you into cruelty. I will help, he said, but not by pretending that hurt is helium. Something in her posture loosened. Okay. Then, brusque again, authority rebuttoned. Friday. He rose. She did not stop him. In the kitchen he fed Milo, rinsed 2 glasses that weren't dirty, folded a dish towel as if crease could restore order. When he returned, she had moved to the bedroom doorway and stood there touching the jam with her fingertips, the way you touch a person's wrist to count the truth of their pulse. "Will you come to bed?" she asked, without looking at him. "Not tonight. Because you're angry?" "Because I'm listening," he said. "To both of us. And we're loud right now." She nodded once. "Good night, Ethan." "Good night, Lena." He lay on the couch, his arm curved around the shape the cat made of himself, and felt the loft breathe. The city tapped lightly at the windows, a patient metronome. He thought of the screenshots, the small kindness in Jules's descent, the heavier kindness in Marcus's quiet. He thought of Lena's question, "Do you think I don't love you?" And his answer, which had been truthful and insufficient at once. Sleep arrived with no ceremony. In the middle of the night he woke to the sound of water in the pipes and realized he wasn't rehearsing replies. It felt like quitting a job you loved after it stopped loving you back. He missed the work even as his body unclenched. Before dawn he rose and watched the bay shoulder a paler sky. The loft looked gentler in first light, honest about its scuffs. He made coffee. He wrote an email to himself with 2 columns, what I can carry, what I will not. Under the second he typed, public cruelty dressed as charm. He let the cursor blink there until the words belonged to him. At 7, Lena appeared in a robe, hair unbound, face unmarketed. For a moment, he saw the undergraduate with rain in her lashes, the girl who could sit on a kitchen floor and laugh at nothing for hours. She poured coffee, sipped, winced, smiled at her own wincing. "We'll need flowers," she said, businesslike but not brittle. "And seating. The table is too long for tenderness." "Make it round," he said. She looked at him as if he'd offered her a metaphor, and maybe he had. "Round," she repeated and nodded. "I'll handle invitations. You be here." "I will," he said. He meant Friday, and he meant the harder geography beyond it. They stood like that a while. 2 people inventing a fragile grammar from shards and steam. Outside, fairies wrote their slow sentences across the water. Inside, a cat finished his breakfast, leapt to the window, and put his paw to the glass, as if to test whether light has a texture. By Friday evening, the loft had been reimagined, not transformed so much as staged to resemble forgiveness. The long rectangular table was replaced by a round one, as if geometry itself could coax people toward humility. Low bowls of white ranunculus ringed small candles. The light they cast seemed trained to flatter, not to reveal. Lena moved through the room in a silk dress the color of a yes that hasn't yet cost anything. Her voice was gentle, her hands efficient. She was doing what she knew, building a moment that might hold. Ethan watched her from the kitchen doorway, sleeves rolled, tie still draped over a chair as a promise deferred. She glanced up once. There was no hostility in her eyes, only the bright steadiness of someone who intends to make a difficult thing look simple. Guests arrived as if stepping into a photograph. Sabrina with a bottle that didn't need a label. Marcus offering a smile in the key of ceasefire. Jules in a green that remembered rain. Others followed, their greetings careful and kind, as though walking across a floor still setting. "Round table," Sabrina observed, admiring the diplomacy. "Inspired." "Ethan suggested it," Lena said, and let the credit land where it belonged. It was a small surrender, and he marked it with inward gratitude the way a sailor marks a change in wind. Dinner began in a softened register. The first course arrived like a rehearsal for appetite. Chilled pea soup laced with mint, an idea of spring served in white. Conversation kept to safe harbors, weather, a gallery opening, the ferry schedules that had become inexplicably fascinating to the city's social calendar. Ethan answered when spoken to, and when he laughed, it was because something was truly funny. There are nights when even good wine tastes like duty. This was not one of them. Marcus caught Ethan's eye over the rim of a glass. "Are we all right?" And Ethan's slow nod said, "Not yet, but closer to shore." By the time a pasta nested with lemons and thyme appeared, the room had relaxed into the illusion that peace need only be plated beautifully. Lena saw it too, the ease ripple outward, the work taking. She gave Ethan a small, grateful look, and he felt something unclench in his chest, the tiniest hinge agreeing to move. When the plates were cleared, Lena stood, fingertips resting lightly on the back of her chair. The room stilled with the manners of people accustomed to speeches that perform as anesthesia. She did not read from notes. Her voice, when it came, was unadorned. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Last week was unkind. I was unkind. I spoke to the room instead of to my husband. I thought a laugh would save me from a feeling I didn't want to carry. It didn't." She looked down, just once, and then back up. "I'm sorry, Ethan." It was not a perfect apology. Perfection would have been a kind of vanity. This was better, mortal, a little uneven at the edges, true where it mattered. A breath moved across the table like a small weather. Ethan rose more slowly, because endings and beginnings deserve deliberation. "Thank you," he said first, not to win points, but because gratitude should be named while it is still warm. He let a beat pass. "I have also made our private ache too public. Words carry differently in a room than in a kitchen. For that, I'm sorry." A murmured assent traveled the circle. Sabrina's visible relief, Marcus's nearly inaudible good, Jules's quiet, satisfied exhale. It could have ended there, with decency restored and narrative repaired. But there are truths that refuse to be composted into politeness. Ethan reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, where it hung over the chair, and withdrew a small box, plain, tied with white string. He did not produce it with flourish. He set it near Lena's plate, as one might set down a note that had waited its turn. Her eyes flicked from the box to his, question clear as glass. He gave the smallest nod. "Now." Lena untied the string. Inside lay a cat toy, nothing ornate, a simple felt heart stitched with red thread, a tiny bell hidden where the shape curved. Attached to it was a tag, handwritten in Ethan's neat engineer's script. "For when the room is louder than love, try this first, then me." Silence arranged itself differently, less like shock, more like air deciding to be air again. Jules pressed 2 fingers to her mouth and smiled the way women smile when a man has done something unshowy and exact. Marcus stared at his napkin as if reading Braille. Sabrina's eyes glossed and then cleared. Good hosts do not cry where guests can see. Lena lifted the felt heart with both hands as if it might bruise. The bell chimed once, the smallest punctuation. Her laughter came, untrained, uncurated, the sound he remembered from the kitchen with the cheap wine. It wasn't a performance. It was relief finding its voice. "That's wicked," she whispered, but there was admiration in the word. "And fair." Her gaze met his, naked of every job she did for a living. "And kind." "It's a reminder," he said, soft enough that only the nearby could hear. "Before we ask strangers to hold our story, we can give each other a chance." He looked around the table then, not to recruit the room, but to release it. "I don't want an audience for my marriage. I want witnesses to our better tries." There was nothing to applaud, and so no one did. They did something harder. They changed posture, shoulders lowered, jaws unclenched. A collective relief moved through the circle, not because drama had won, but because someone had chosen not to feed it. Milo, who had been dignifiedly invisible until that moment, leapt from the stair and arrived with the confidence of creatures who believe they are central to every story. He placed both paws on Lena's knee, nose lifted toward the felt heart, bell trembling with interest. Laughter rose, this time the round, clean kind that spills when a room remembers it is human. Lena lowered the toy to Milo. He batted it once, then, satisfied, took imperial possession. "Traitor," she told him, and rubbed the top of his head with the side of her thumb. When she looked up again, her eyes shone, not the glassy heat of defense, but the bright wet of surrender that isn't loss. "Thank you," she said to Ethan, and the words sounded like a door unlocked from the inside. Dessert arrived unnoticed, and then fully noticed. Slices of almond cake tasting faintly of apricot, spoons finding the cool center of something that wanted to be a cloud, and settled, reluctantly, for custard. Conversation warmed, and it did not circle Lena and Ethan like a bonfire. The attention returned to its proper scale, small, companionable, enough. Jules touched Ethan's forearm when the table loosened and pairs formed like constellations. "You threaded a needle," she said. "Most people use a sword." "I've tried both," he admitted. "Needles leave prettier scars." "Scars are still scars," she said, but her smile carried the grace of a benediction. Sabrina, relieved into her best self, began praising the florist and the baker and the notion of round tables. Marcus collected plates with the ceremony of a man granting dignity to labor. Voices overlapped in low, humane music. At some point, Lena stood beside Ethan at the kitchen island, two people briefly anonymous in the domestic act of rinsing glasses. "I know what you did," she said without looking at him. "You shifted the room without shaming me." "I wanted to shift us," he said. She nodded, as if accounting for a variable she had miscalculated and was glad to have found. "There's one more thing," she added, voice steady. "After tonight, I won't make our marriage a room again." She turned then, a small smile rearranging her mouth. "Even when the room begs." "The room always begs," he said. "And we always choose," she answered. Later, after goodbyes that sounded like goodnights, the loft exhaled. Candles hissed into darkness. The cat toy lay abandoned under a chair, the bell stilled, the felt heart slightly damp at its seam, where a creature had loved it with his mouth. Ethan stooped to pick it up, smoothed it between his fingers, and set it on the counter beside a cooling spoon. Lena stood by the balcony door, the city folding and unfolding itself beyond the glass. "I don't know how to repay what you did tonight," she said. "Don't," he replied, falling on the next right sentence, he said, "in the kitchen, not the room." She came to him then with the unremarkable grace of a person coming home from work. No performance, no crown, no stage. He felt the shift, the true one, the only one that counted, as palpable as a change in weather. Outside, fairies stitched patient light across the water. Inside, two people practiced a smaller, harder art, not turning love into spectacle, and not letting apology be a costume. The round table remained, an unarguable moon in the center of the room, waiting to be set for ordinary mornings. Coffee, toast, a quiet that isn't fragile because it is finally shared. The following days came like weather that couldn't decide. A squall, a sunbreak, another squall. Phones vibrated on hard surfaces until the rooms themselves seemed impatient. Calls, accusations, tears threaded through apologies that wanted to be instruments and kept turning into static. Lena's voice moved across the line with a practiced steadiness that frayed at the edges. Explanations about pressure, optics, the strange gravity of being watched. Ethan listened the way a shoreline listens to the tide, accepting what arrived, letting go of what must return to sea. He had thought endings would require thunder. Instead, clarity arrived with the gentleness of a hand taking its weight back. He saw the pattern at last, a latticework of smaller yields masquerading as devotion. The jokes he swallowed to make a room easier. The posture he adopted so she could stand taller. The quiet he wore like good clothes until it began to feel like skin. Years of being made small and, worse, learning to assist. They sat at the round table one last time, the candles unlit, the ranunculus gone to paper. He spoke first, because the truest sentence is sometimes the one you've rehearsed least. "I'm choosing myself," he said, and the words did not bruise the air. Lena held the edge of her chair like a railing. "So that's it? It's the beginning," he answered. They did not become villains for each other. She cried without an audience, and he didn't mistake the sound for a tool. He boxed the things that were his and left the things that were theirs. He took the cat, because promises to creatures exist outside negotiations. Milo stepped into the carrier with a dignity that made the whole event feel less like a departure and more like a correct migration. The apartment he found near the water had soft floors and a view the size of a forgiveness. Morning came in through a western pane and taught him to like the look of an unmade bed. He learned the map of the place the way you learn a tender body, where it creaked, where it held, where it made music if you pressed the right way. He set the felt heart on the windowsill. He placed the round table by the glass and left it undecorated. A circle is still a circle even when it's only holding keys. Lena's friends shattered along their seams, half of them posting bright hymns to resilience, the other half typing messages that began with, "I've been thinking." The group chat became a small civil war conducted in punctuation. Jules sent him a single line. "Kindness is a discipline. Keep yours." He pinned it like a quiet medal. Work, which had waited patiently at the edge of the stage, stepped forward. The promotion arrived without fanfare. An email, a handshake, a corner of the city that would now hold more of his name. The new project was a pier extension that needed to look like grace and stand like a vow. He walked the site a dozen times, memorizing the conversations between tidal forces and steel, the whispering arithmetic of load and give. In meetings, he spoke with the authority of a man who had made a decision and survived it. His team noticed. The building did too. He began to answer old texts, dinners with friends he'd allowed to drift, a hike that asked nothing more of him than steps, an afternoon with Mike at a ball game, where the only performance was the sun trying to stay. He laughed in a way that wasn't strategy. He fell asleep with the windows open to the sleeping city and woke to the sound of gulls arguing about fish and inheritance. He met Zara on a Tuesday the color of seawater. A cafe by the dock, a table littered with journals, and a field guide to Pacific plankton, scribbles, arrows, the odd small watercolor of something alive. She wore a sweatshirt the shade of kelp and had a laugh that didn't search for witnesses. When he asked what she did, she said, "I listen to oceans until they talk back," and then laughed at herself, not to apologize, but to calibrate. Marine biologist, salt dry hands, eyes that liked to stay on a subject until the subject told the truth. They walked the length of the pier with paper cups growing lighter in their hands. She spoke about eelgrass meadows as if they were opera houses, about the bright stubbornness of harbor seals, about restoration as a practice that refuses despair. He told her about piers and planes and the way a structure must be introduced to the forces that will love and hurt it. They compared notes until the metaphors admitted they were the same animal. When she laughed, he didn't feel himself checked for shine. He felt included. It was startling, the ease. They dated the way low tide dates the shore, arriving, leaving, arriving again, neither of them mistaking rhythm for retreat. She came to his apartment once with a bundle of rosemary and a story about an octopus who had outwitted an entire research team. He kissed her by the window where the cat pretended not to watch. When she asked about his past, he gave her the short version and a single long pause. "I kept shrinking to fit a room," he said. "Now I'm learning my size." Months passed, Clean and accurate. He learned how to cook one dish perfectly. He learned Milo's new habit of pressing his paw to the glass at sunrise, as if testing light for ripeness. He learned to sit still without calling it failure. He learned to forgive himself for liking his own company. One evening, he took a photo of Milo asleep on the couch. The gold body folded into a crescent. The whiskers relaxed. The felt heart tucked beneath a paw like a saved seat. He posted it with a caption that felt like breath. Cats choose who makes them feel safe. He didn't think beyond that. No epilogue, no barb hidden in the wool. The post wandered into his old circle and bloomed. It traveled not because it wounded, but because people recognized the exact shape of what it held. Messages arrived from unlikely directions, men who had learned to live at half volume, women who had apologized until their throats forgot other sounds. "Me too," they wrote. "Thank you for naming it without burning it down." He read them all and answered some, not as a symbol, but as one man whose eyes had adjusted. He did not gloat, even privately. Lena's life became quieter in the places where she preferred it loud. Partnerships loosened. Invitations dwindled by a degree only hosts notice. It was not a punishment. Punishments crave judges. It was a social weather change, the kind that teaches you which jackets are warm and which are merely bright. He wished her well, in a way that did not require intimacy. Late that year, he stood on his balcony with Sarah and watched the fairies write white names into the dark water. The air had the clean edge of a leaf newly torn. She leaned her head to his shoulder, and the city, for once, did not insist on being story. "What do you want to build next?" she asked. "Something that lasts," he said, "and something that doesn't need witnesses to be real." "Those are the best kinds," she said. Inside, Milo leapt to the back of the couch and yawned, a small lion at ease. Ethan looked from the water to the window to the woman who didn't require a room to verify him, and felt the remainder of the sky open, wide, ordinary enough. If this chapter found you at the edge of a choice, I hope it gave you a gentler language for leaving or staying. If any sentence here felt like a hand on your back, light, steady, share it forward. Like the story, leave a comment with what resonated, and follow along for the next quiet reckoning. The work of choosing yourself is never loud, but it carries.